Well, their white privilege to me is that they've fucked it over. Their white privilege.
No, but this is the thing. The problem with white privilege, in my opinion, is that when you say white privilege, who are you talking about exactly? Are you talking about like people that came during the colonial era, or are you talking about the wave of immigrants that came in the 19th century? Because there was a lot of immigrants that came from Italy, that came from like Switzerland during that era or that time. German people came during that time, and they are white, but they don't necessarily. They don't really.
They didn't come with the same Protestant privilege.
Their ancestry doesn't trace back to colonialism. Here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Boom. What's going on, everybody? You're sticking around on The Nest, episode number 13 now. With me today is my good friend and yours, Vicente Brambila. How's it going, man?
You know, Jason, it's been going very well, honestly. I can't complain. I feel that ever since we last, seen each other, there's been a whole shit going on, like too much stuff going on in life. But the things that are going on are happening, and they're happening for a good change, I think. And frankly, I'd say that this past 3 years have been the best of my life.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Wow, man.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting.
I mean,
so before we go on, I want to give people context.
Of course.
So you're a government and dance major, right?
Yes, a dance government joint major and a minor in Spanish.
But before you said you were an economics major?
I was an econ government joint major at Franklin and Marshall College, and I took the switch to go into dance because I found and unfolded a passion after taking my arts requirements at F&M. And I took that arts requirement 2 semesters ago, and I didn't realize that there was a lot of passion to be unfolded in that field. And I started getting into this kinesiology, and then the whole idea of...
Oh, you're into that too, kinesiology?
Kinesiology and kinesthesia, right? So there's connection of kinesthesia, which is pretty much the study of movement, but kinesiology goes with that because you need to know your body in order for it to function the way that you want it to move, right? So there's this huge connection, which I was actually talking today, is about how kinesiology has a lot to do with kinesthesia, right? Kinesthesia is like the movement study, yeah. So it's been pretty good, man, honestly. And I feel that those classes, the general ed requirements at the undergraduate level, is what those GEDs are what matter in order for you to make those right decisions.
Yes, exactly. I 100% agree with you. If it wasn't for those GEDs or those general courses, like you said, I wouldn't have found my interest in politics at all.
Yeah,
I was a business major before, and I've talked about it before. But I ended up finding a passion for politics, so that's why I'm doing it.
I came into F&M with the politics. No matter what, I was like, I need to do government because it already lived in me.
Yeah.
And it unfolded very well there. I've taken many courses, like from global justice and injustices to philosophy to modern political theory, to even then like development courses that have intersections with gender studies. Like I took women culture development at F&M, like all these different courses that just introduce you to all of these different loads of. And then I took Marxian economics, which was the best class.
Karl Marx?
Yeah, it was called Marxian economics, the class. And that class opened my eyes so much, to the extent that, I started becoming more involved and more in tune with my body, because Marx introduces a lot of theory that, first of all, right, let's go on to say that Marx is not socialism that we think of the radical socialism. Yeah. Marx is a school of thought in economics.
Seriously?
Yes. It's a school of thought. That's it. It's a school of thought. It's not socialism. As much as it does have socialist regime and, socialist systems and the economics, it is not necessarily, you can't go ahead and categorize it or even then, make it a communist, because there's no communism in Marx.
I believe I don't think there's been full-fledged communism before. I don't think so.
There's never been full-fledged communism.
I think the person that actually introduced socialism, I think it had to be Lenin. I don't think it was Karl Marx.
Yes.
So I think you're right in that regard.
Yes.
Anyways, keep going. You were saying that it had something to do with dance.
Yeah, so dance. I started doing this thing with dance just actually this semester, and I went full on to introduce the first Mesoamerican reconstructed dance at Franklin and Marshall College after 470 something years of existence. I was the first one to introduce a Mesoamerican dance to that college.
Yeah.
Hence, that college was open when the Constitution was written. So
Wow, really? I didn't know that.
yeah, 1787 was its funded year, and
It is situated in Pennsylvania, right? You go to
Correct.
Franklin Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
that's right. Yes. So I'm out of state, but I am still a Boyle Heights hooded. So I still come back for my breaks and stuff, and it's amazing to come back home and to have that opportunity and have scholarships that can fund you.
Now this might actually mess up the audio quality for a little bit, but okay. Anyways, you were going.
Yeah.
So
So
what you were saying?
yeah. So so it's nice to come back home and have that feeling of knowing where you're from and reminding yourself with more purpose every time you go back to
That's
college.
true. That's something I actually noticed. Like
Yeah.
when I come back here, I kind of get that sense of purpose, that sense of wanting to succeed in college.
I agree fully because it's a reminder, but more than just a reminder, sometimes it becomes, to me, it's my influence, it's my empowerment. My community is my empowerment because it's the voice that we have, right, that matters in the classroom. And then whatever happens in the classroom is really it.
Hold on. I think I'm just gonna cut this part out.
Oh yeah, no
'cause
problem.
This
I think they
we
might
live
do
in a
that.
city, so it is gonna get pretty noisy.
Yeah.
I want to go back to. Okay, but before I go do that, can you please finish what you were saying before we were interrupted?
So
You come back with a sense of purpose.
yeah, with a sense of purpose and very influenced by my community and the idea of having a voice in a classroom that's predominantly white and privileged, and always being the other.
Okay. Before we go into that conversation, I want to go a little bit more into what you were talking about, that the Mesoamerican dances that you introduced to Franklin and Marshall.
Yes.
So how did that come about?
So I digged deep into where I was from. And that had a lot of meaning, right? So where you're from becomes a question that we tend to be asked, what's your background, or what's this, what's your race, what's your ethnicity? And at the end of the fucking day, I don't know what the fuck I am, right?
I mean, I'm pretty sure a lot of us don't.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
So
hard to
a
find
lot of
out,
us
yeah.
don't, right? However, there is sometimes this instinct, right, that I was talking to you about earlier. This instinct that connects us as individuals to certain things without knowing, and that was the dance aspect, right?
Yeah.
I liked being barefoot. I like doing this. I like dancing to natural sounds like thunder or like shit like that. That's so abnormal and abstracted, but yet it has a very strict connection to nature. So then I started getting more involved and in tune with that, and I was like, there's a lot behind that. And so I started doing research on like what tribes or what dancers in the past would actually dance to thunder or dance to the rain or dance this to the fire to.
And this whole thing was just entirely intuitive.
Yeah, it was very
It
intuitive.
just came to you like, oh, I love dancing to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then the drums, right? And of course, the drums were like the idea of the heartbeat, because
Right.
that's what a drum is. It's almost a heartbeat. That's what it
Yes.
represents. So I started becoming more involved with that, and I started doing research on Mesoamerican traditional dances. And that's where I fell into it, and I was like, you know what, this is some shit I want to get into.
Right.
It's very spiritual, and a lot of my existence has been like this huge like debate of like what spirituality is to me, and where my faith comes from, and etc. This is a conversation almost of identity, right? It's like a crisis that we're introduced to a religion, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what we want in our lives, right?
Yeah.
So as we grow into becoming adults, we learn about ourselves. And that's where I started learning about like how I didn't have this strict, or not as strict, but I didn't have that intimate relationship with the Catholic religion.
Yeah.
I knew that a lot of shit has happened in the past with the Catholic religion that I did not agree with. So not to blame God for that, right?
Yeah.
But that is honestly what introduced me to like this whole Mesoamerican dance thing, because a lot of the genocides that were created and the atrocities that happened
During
and
imperialism.
yeah, imperialism, colonialism, and all of these atrocities that happened that are not written in history because they were not the winners of the war, right?
Yeah.
So my responsibility now through dance is to reconstruct these movements to tell a story that was never told.
Right.
So that's what I find dance to be, that segue into introducing a different way of creating a message that was hidden and destroyed and burned. Yeah. So that's my voice in dance currently. And that's why I really wanted to start doing this more research and more in depth, even then identity, spirituality, a sense of meditation. Mm-hmm. Every time I started my rehearsals with my dancers, we always started laying down on the floor, and they just became in tune with their heart pulse. And as soon as they started becoming in tune with their heart pulse, they started responding to the djembe, which is a drum, and it's a West African drum. Yeah. And once they started to become more in tune with the drums, right, then that's where they would rise up from the floor and start dancing. Right. So, and they didn't necessarily have to be Mesoamerican or Mexican descent. The dancers were from all over the world, actually. That's
really strange.
The dancers were from all over the world. We had Chinese dancers, Japanese dancers.
But couldn't you attribute that to like just the human instinct to want to dance or express yourself?
And that is my point, that it goes beyond just Mesoamerica. Wow. That there is this huge connection with a lot of indigenous tribes before imperialism that was never told.
But do you think it reaches far beyond that? Like the fact that as human beings we like to express ourselves through movement, or
we don't all like to do that.
You don't think so?
Nope.
What groups would you say don't like to do that? Don't like to dance?
The ones that have normalized a lot of society. The ones that have created an expectation of what is normal versus abnormal. The ones that have said, you can't have your kid screaming in the metro because he's going to go wild, or, things like that. Those people that can't even listen to other humans talk. Those are the people that don't dance. Those are the people that don't embrace and express through movements, because if in the first place they can't tolerate another human's existence, then they won't be able to even come into touch with themselves.
But do you think that's intuitive, or do you think that's something that's taught? Because I feel that
dance is intuitive. Yeah. Yes, dance is intuitive. However, a lot of people do grow up dancing, and the most, in terms of my knowledge of and exposure to dance, a lot of the dancers that were in the dance department at FNM actually come from ballet conservatives. And these ballet conservatives, it's because that's how they were almost like raised into dance. Right. On the other hand, I never stepped foot on a studio floor in my whole life, and I go to FNM and I take one class. Now my first time in a professional studio, and there I am creating shit, and it comes out of the nowhere. It literally comes out of the nowhere, and that is the intuition that we're talking about. However, before I even stepped in the studio, I knew that there was this connection with dance, because in high school, you seen me dance to like the Mexican regional music, the banda and stuff. I remember those days, yeah. I was dancing to all of that stuff because my body responded the way it did. No one taught me. I just danced. Exactly. I embraced that aspect of the culture. But it is that culture, and then this becomes a clash of civilizations, right? Where we have cultures that accept the embracing aspect of through movements of culture, and there's cultures that simply don't even accept that, that see it as, there's some people that see dance as something that only prostitutes do, that only, like table dancers do, so it's like, it becomes this whole other conversation of what dance is, who, like, a whole crisis of identity. But
okay, but before we go on, can you do me a favor and please turn on that TV over there?
Yeah, of course.
So I could just keep track of the timer here. It seems that we're stepping into the conversation of this whole struggle, this class struggle kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think this might have cut it off. Yeah, I think. Yeah, we're stepping into this whole conversation now about like conservatism and like people that you say are privileged. You studied out of state.
Yes.
What's that experience like going for you? Because I noticed that you posted some stuff on Facebook or like through other social media platforms. I can't really remember which ones.
And it's Facebook, yeah.
But and the messages were kind of obscure. You kind of like hinted that you were having problems, but I wasn't really sure what the problems were.
Yeah. Listen, at F&M, I've had many problems. Very personal ones, and some of them more general. I will speak to the general ones right now. The general problems that I've had at F&M have been of inclusivity, of diversity, and they're all lack of, right? Lack of inclusivity, lack of diversity, lack of resources.
But wouldn't you attribute that to the fact that Pennsylvania or that area, Lancaster, is not really diverse? It's filled with a lot of white people.
Well, Lancaster is the #1 city that accepts the most refugees in this country. So that in itself.
But like the community that's near in Lancaster.
I would say the state.
The state.
The state of Pennsylvania has remained Republican for a while now.
I thought it was Democrat.
No, Republican now.
Seriously?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a swing state, so usually it goes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it's Republican. That's what, but it does have to do with that, but I feel that the problem becomes more institutional rather than community. Because Lancaster in itself doesn't necessarily attribute too much to the college, because the college is a private enterprise. So there is not too much interaction with the community of Lancaster and F&M. However, there are a lot of students that are taking initiatives. For example, I was taking a class in my Spanish through my Spanish major, where I would tutor medical ESL to Cuban doctors that had just immigrated to the United States, and I was teaching them English medical ESL terms as a part of a requirement for a class that was community-based learning. But if the class is not community-based learning, there is very little to none interaction with the community of Lancaster. I think that this gap of inequality in terms of diversity and inclusivity comes with the anger and the eagerness to say that this college promised me that they would have resources for first-generation college students, that they promised me that they would have a diverse face, an inclusive face, and they don't. They sell themselves like that. That's the reality. And there's many initiatives that must be taken. And I will speak to this to the public now, because Dr. Porterfield, which was the presidents before at Franklin and Marshall College, which is now taken over by Dr. Altman, President Porterfield, or Dr. Porterfield, he had promised a center 10 years ago specifically for first-generation college students, so that they can come to this center for additional tutoring, for any type of resource that they needed. Specifically, once again, for first-generation college students. And this center, after 12 years, is still not present. So that was a promise that was never even present at the school.
Did you talk to anyone at the school about this?
If I do talk to people about the school about this, they tend to not do much about it. They tend to not necessarily care, because once you're in the system, you're in the institution, and you kind of have to live up to it now. Like, you have to be a part of it. So that's what I've done. I become a part of it. And by becoming a part of it, I have to make sure I voice myself. I have to make sure that I can do things like this and, take advantage of opportunities like this, so that we can go ahead and voice these issues, so that one day, hopefully, we can say that the change will come, right? And that's just a problem that F&M has. But in itself, it's also just this huge gap of income. You have this financial need-based system, which pretty much gives financial aid to students of lower income. But then you have the higher income students, higher income. Like, I'm talking about parents that are millionaires.
Okay.
And you have these students and classmates in your class,
Yeah.
and these classes don't exceed 12 students sometimes. So you have a very intimate interaction, and almost in every class that I've sat in, it's a seminar style.
Yeah.
There's always conversation and dialogue going on, but then your perspective isn't valued, or you're that other, right? You start becoming the other perspective, the perspective that introduces a counter, but like a counter argument, but isn't sufficient enough because it was only one lived experience. But what they don't know is that one lived experience multiplies by the size of our community.
Right.
And that's my responsibility.
So you're talking very vaguely about the, like, I really want to know, like, what exactly happened, or like when, if it's not too personal, like I want to know, like, when you experienced, like, or what it was that you said that kind of didn't get heard, or what was it? What were you guys discussing? Or
you see, something extremely personal, but I'm gonna be more vague about it, but I'm still touching on the personal part of it. The school has a very interesting policy in terms of sexual abuse.
okay,
And a lot of students struggle with this at that college. And like it's been seen in the national news, a lot of fraternity, brothers
yeah, they tend to
have been accused of sexual
and it's happened in my
assaults.
school as well.
And that's happened in almost every school. That's right.
Yeah.
If you have a Greek system, you are more than likely going to be having sexual assault cases because there's alcohol involved and etc.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Yes. So, but I'm not connecting it to the Greek life in this case.
Okay.
This is more directly with the institution that was a failure. And I broke apart, and they knew I was breaking apart, and there was a lack of response and almost a dumbified response that they thought I was stupid. But they did not know that they really didn't know who they were fucking with.
Yeah.
So
okay, exactly, because you're a fighter.
Yeah,
and you've always been that person.
And thank you, and I really respect that you say that, because I personally, not until that moment, I was like, oh, they hit the trigger.
Ever since you told off Gladden back in 9th grade, I knew. I'm like, this guy's a fucking fighter.
She's an interesting person too. But and ever since that moment, I was, I became a lot more spoken.
Yeah.
And less afraid, because I knew that the will was out, that the case was something that affected me personally, and that it was really killing me inside. And luckily, I found dance, right, to be this new form of expression that has significantly helped me throughout my recovery. If it would have not been because of the dance department and because of dance in itself, I feel like I would have probably come back to Boyle Heights. I would have not finished my career at Franklin and Marshall College, and I would have probably been another failure. And I would have, because that's what victims go through, right?
Do you think that white privilege is a thing? Like, you think it's a real thing?
I live it. So yes, it is a real thing.
In which way? I want to really know more about this.
White privilege is when you are worrying about stupid shit that has mainly to do with commodity, and that's your main worry. That's white privilege to me.
How so?
When life doesn't become the thing that you become worried about. Rather, it's a commodity that you're worried about. It's the selfie that you become worried about. It is the most superficial shit that you become worried about. And school is not even one of them. Why? Because white privilege secures your school. You live up to the expectation already to go to college. That's white privilege. College becomes a part of your life. And education becomes part of your life. Oh, wait a second. Let me tell you what white privilege is. That you're employed by the time that you graduate from college. Let me tell you the other thing. That you can afford a $70,000 a year institution. That's white privilege.
But if that's the case, wouldn't you also make the argument that there's such a thing as Asian privilege? Because if you look at the statistics, and I was looking at them today, the U.S. Census Bureau of 2017, and 2016, they reported that the median income of a Asian American is actually higher than a white American. And what would you say against something like that?
I would say this. In a situation of racial profiling, who will get away? The Asian or the white guy?
Well, I'd hope that it wouldn't matter on the race or the ethnicity. It mattered on the crime that's being committed.
The crime that's being committed, right? Let's go on with that. What is the crime being committed within a white and an Asian, right? Then it becomes, I think, a question of, is there even a crime being committed, right? Is it even been filed? So the communities that these people come from is another privilege.
Right.
Because the news has become this whole false shit that, the news in itself, it just becomes this network of false, almost I feel like it's a false advertisement. That's how I see it, right? And yeah, it might be that there is Asian American privilege. There might be that's a thing, but that's notwithstanding the fact that there's still minorities in this country.
So you think that white privilege is more of a social issue rather than a systematic one? Or would you say or argue that it's both?
White privilege is a social and an institutional,
because this
and
whole
a systematic.
The idea or the notion of white privilege was partially what led to the Black Lives Matter movement, right?
Yeah. And then the All Lives Matter movement, which is fucking stupid, but yeah.
So I mean, it's been widely considered a social movement, like the Black Lives Matter movement. This fight against like whiteness.
Well, it's not against whiteness. Black Lives Matter is a fight against the shootings against black people. It's about actually the fact that Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
Because a lot of black people are not seen as people yet.
Yeah, and people that were on that movement were saying that, oh well, they don't kill white people like they kill the black people, and that's actually not true. Police kill more white people than they do black people annually, and there's a statistic on that. I should have actually looked that up before I did this, but I could look that up for you right now.
There's someone knocking.
Before we all right, so that was just cut out.
You're fine.
So we were talking about
we're having a conversation here.
The fact that police actually tend to kill more white people than they do black people.
So in what cases, though?
I forgot where I actually got this from, but it was from like the police or something like that. Let's do the Washington Post, man. Or I really wished I could have got the statistics for you, man. I think this one would be a Statista. White. So if this is the actual statistics I think I was looking at, but this is as credible as a source as you can get. So as you see here, you can see that there is in fact a disparity between the deaths that are committed by police, and they do in fact tend to kill more white people than black people. And I think my reasoning for that would be that people are more careful about killing a black person in today's time than a white person, because they know that the negative backlash that the police department would get. So this is the years 2019, 2018, and 2017.
Okay. So
and it's entirely okay, because this is a misconception that a lot of people have, that police are killing black people at a far greater rate than they are white people, but that's actually not true if you look at the statistics. And I would really want people to look this up themselves and see for themselves that this is in fact true.
So in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement,
Right.
So the Black Lives Matter movement is, to me, the way I understood it, is a movement that happens in terms of not having black lives being killed for their race.
Right.
Because that's what happens. And there is also a statistic that's been proven that there's more white people that commit crimes than black people.
And that's exactly why they are getting
So that's
shot.
why there's an association to that.
But I'd like to make the point that I feel that I don't believe that this is, or not in all cases. I think in the majority of the cases, it's not really, police are not killing people because they are racist. I feel like there's just a lack of training, or there's a lack of actually hiring people that are capable to be a police officer. Because in my opinion, to be a police officer, you have to have certain qualities. You have to have fearlessness. You have to have control of yourself in very critical situations. And I feel like not everybody, I feel like the majority of people don't have those qualities. But since there's a great demand for police officers in the department, I feel that they're making it way too easy to become a police officer in today's age. I feel like that's what it is more than anything. I feel like it's not, or it has far less to do with racism than it actually does with lack of training or lack of qualities, lack of skills.
I think it might have to do with both, right?
Okay.
You know, and I can see how the lack of training is a huge aspect of it, you know, but it's also still become a racial thing, because there's still this profiling that happens. No matter what race you are, there still is a profiling that happens, because our society has become very superficial, and it stigmatizes groups for their color, and you profile those individuals on that basis. And I mean, my own brother-in-law was stopped by the cops here in Boyle Heights because he was confused, and he had nothing to do with anything that they were arresting him for at all.
That's actually a violation. If you stop someone without probable cause.
Yeah, that's a violation, but that's also racial profiling.
Okay, how so?
Because they didn't know why in the first place, why are they stopping him? And what basis, what knowledge did they have, right? The only knowledge that I can suppose that they had to stop him was that it was a Latino with this height and etc. That's, I think, the only, and that's a profiling, right? But it becomes a racial profiling because the color matters and ethnicity matters.
Well, if you look at the population in this area, the majority is Hispanic.
Yeah.
I believe that the statistic is somewhere above 90%. It's Hispanic. Excuse me. So the people that you pull over here are going to be Hispanic. And the people, the police officers that are assigned this location, they can't move out of it. They have to work in this area, like the people that are assigned this area.
Yeah.
So if they're going to pull someone over, it's most likely going to be Hispanic.
Yeah. Well, in that case, it could be, right? But I guess, and I go back to the same where, why did they stop him then?
Right. I mean, he has all the right to tell the police officers,
My sister did.
What's your probable cause?
My sister went to go tell them off. And my sister, being a sociology major,
I wonder what they told him when they pulled him over. Did they tell him? Because I think
they said he did not have a right to speak.
Really?
Yeah.
They told him you have no right to speak?
Yeah.
But what I'm really concerned about is why they pulled him over. Like, did they tell him when?
And that's our question, right? That's why we believe in racial profiling. That's why we believe that there's all these social movements that are happening, because no one really knows unless you become a part of the police force how these profiling cases come to be, and how you choose your victims, and how you choose and select who are you going to be stopping and who are you not going to be stopping, right? And that's why the Black Lives Matter movement comes into, and where all of this, it all just comes up to be because there is no explanation. So if there's no explanation by the police, then how can there not be a response, a social response?
Right.
That's where I believe, yes, it is a systematic issue within the police departments in terms of their lack of training, but it also just becomes more of like, well, who are you giving a gun to?
Right.
Like, who is the one, at this point, everyone can own a gun.
Right.
But I mean, it's been the thing. But the thing is, like, who are you training to say that they're willing to put their lives, at risk with a real criminal sometimes, or sometimes it's not a real. I don't know. It's just a whole systematic issue that that we both agree on. But
Well,
then there's
I'd
a
like
social
to-
response.
I'd like to believe that the police department is not this evil entity or this evil force that people like to say it is, because I mean, for the most part, the experiences that I've had, and I know this is entirely subjective to my experiences, have been pretty well. And I know a couple police officers. My mom is friends with them, and I mean, they're just regular people like me and you. But like I said, I think the problem that arises is when you hire people that, just like I said, don't have the qualities to react to critical situations.
Correct.
When to draw the gun, or when to actually pin someone to the ground and choke them and forcibly handcuff them. You know what I mean? There a lot of people like that do exist. But I'd like to believe that the police department is doing its best job to hire people that have the qualities, or that people that have the skills to be able to respond to critical situations. But like I said, there's a lot of people that go into this department, and not a lot of them are also well qualified.
I would like to believe that too.
So
because I to an extent can believe it, to an extent I can't.
I mean,
I'm not saying that police officers, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that are evil at all. I'm not saying that. That's not what I stand for. They're also people. They're also humans,
Exactly.
right? But what I am saying though is become a systematic issue. That's the reality. That's what it really is. It's a systematic issue, and this goes back to our president.
Donald J. Trump, this man.
Why would you say that Mexicans are the main cause of marijuana and drugs when that is a false statement?
What do you mean?
That Mexicans are the drug dealers, that Mexicans, are the rapists, that Mexicans are this and that and blah, all this shit, right?
Yeah.
When cannabis was actually not introduced by a Mexican to this country, but it started to get this representation from Mexicans when that's not the reality. There's this false association that now has become this huge stigma against Mexican people. And then you have Fox stating the 4 Mexican countries on their news report. What the fuck is that?
Yeah, I saw it.
And that's my thing. White privilege is saying 4 Mexican countries without being taking a responsibility.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think that's white privilege. I just think that's a lack of knowledge or something. That was just a clear slip up, man.
I think there is no slip up on that, really. 4 Mexican countries? What the fuck is that? I would say 4 Latin American countries if I didn't know the names.
Yeah.
But you cannot say 4 Mexican countries. You're subordinating El Salvador, Costa Rica, all of the other countries that were, that are their own autonomous entities. And that is a privilege to call them the 4 Mexican countries and not to be held accountable for that.
I mean, the media bashed him. Definitely.
Oh, yeah,
bashed
of
him.
course. But Fox is still Fox.
Fox is going to be conservative, man.
I mean, Fox is still Fox, and that to me is white privilege. Because a Mexican person would never say 4 Mexican countries.
Right.
That's the fact, and I go back to my experience at Franklin and Marshall College, that a white person can say that and they wouldn't be held accountable for that. But if I forget one name of a state, I'm not an American.
You think so?
I know so, because it's happened to me in classroom settings. It's happened to me where if I mispronounce a word or anything of that nature, I become a lack of American or lack of this or lack of that. I'm not enough.
Has anyone ever told you that? Like, you're not American, or like you lack American citizenship, or
I've
anything
been
like that?
told I have a very thick accent. I've been told that and whenever I'm asked to read aloud, oh, like, what would you say? Like, making fun of my accent.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So yes, and I feel like once people start making fun of your accent, then it becomes an issue.
Right.
And it becomes an issue of privilege. I do very much think so.
So you're writing on the fact that white privilege is a social thing rather than a systematic thing, because I want to draw that distinction. Is white privilege systematic, or is it entirely social? And if
in what context?
Well, like I said, white privilege has been tied with it being a social and a systematic issue.
Mm-hmm.
I agree that to an extent there is racism, but I like to believe that it's not as a big a deal like a lot of people make it out to be. Like I feel like the people. Well, I mean, I've been in California for like all my life, so
California is a very liberal state.
Yeah, it is.
So,
and you were in a conservative state, but I'd like to believe that for the most part.
And I was also in the other state where when I studied abroad, I was not in another state, but I was in the other side of being Hispanic, right? Where I was in Spain studying abroad, and that was a whole other experience of what it meant to be Hispanic.
Yeah.
Because the way I speak Spanish, in terms of Mexican Spanish, right, still is a standard way of speaking Spanish. However, there is still a difference in the Castellano, which is a different way of speaking Spanish in Spain. And where I was studying in Madrid, then there was another stigma.
Exactly. There's different versions of every language.
Yeah, there's different. I mean, that's a fact, yes. But then when I was in Madrid, I wasn't speaking Castellano. I wasn't speaking Spanish. Oh, yeah, es uno de esos.
Yeah, dialects are a thing.
They categorize you as less.
Yeah.
So yes, I do believe there is white privilege.
Okay, but I want to go back to what I was saying.
And that is a systematic issue actually with language.
How exactly?
Because language becomes it becomes this huge issue of if you speak el estándar or not. If you speak standard Spanish or standard English. There's broken English. There's a lot of Southerners speak different English.
Yeah.
And that's seen as a less way of speaking English.
But I think that still be categorized under social. Wouldn't you agree? Because it's a social.
It becomes systematic. Excuse me, but it becomes systematic when the school says it's not right.
The school told you.
No, when the school says, right, when you're writing a paper, and they say that's not a right way of speaking, that's not a right way of writing, then it becomes a systematic issue.
Like how so?
Well, in the grammar.
Like you were writing something and they told you that it was
no, personally no, but I studied linguistics. So I last summer actually I was on a Hackman fellowship studying linguistics and aptitude and psychology.
Right.
So I was studying the intersections of the social aspects, but also studying the intersections of the aptitude. So I was proving, my point in this whole research was proving that Spanglish is a right way of speaking, and Spanglish on top of that, its production takes a lot more aptitude than the normal monolingual.
Right.
So there is this argument where I'm bashing like the system of like, there is the right standard way versus the non, right? And the non is actually a lot bigger because it introduces those, like Spanglish is English and Spanish simultaneously happening, intracentral sentences. And the people that can produce Spanglish actually are very talented individuals because they have a lot more aptitude in the way they produce language.
I agree with you because I can't do that. Like I can't switch in from English to Spanish. Like people, I've heard a lot of people with fluid Spanglish.
And my point in that is going back to the other ways of speaking is saying that is a systematic and a social issue because if you speak Spanglish, right, sometimes you're seeing as less, but in reality, it's not the case.
Right.
That's not the case. And that's the social issue. And the systematic issue with Spanglish not being recognized as a language. And I've read La Academia Real de España saying that Spanglish is something that pigs speak. Saying it like that.
Right.
So what is that? That's a systematic issue.
But I don't understand where it becomes a systematic issue.
You don't. Well, I think the systematic issue becomes when there's no recognition in a system.
In a system.
Like in a system that of languages, right? For example, in this case of language that I'm using, is the system that creates the languages, right? Or that not creates, but yeah, I guess acknowledges the languages, right? It fails to acknowledge the majority of the spoken language.
Well, I mean, if you look at the United States, it doesn't exactly have an official language.
There's no official language.
Right. There's no official language in the United States, but if there was an official language, like let's say for example tomorrow it becomes English, it's the official language of the United States, and they prohibit you, the government, they prohibit you from speaking Spanglish or using it, I think then it becomes a systematic issue. But up until now, I think
the educational system, right?
it's taught in English.
In standard English.
Right.
And a specific type of English. That is a system.
But do you think that we do that to avoid like confusion? Because now setting English as a standard would only, it'd make it, like I said, a standard. But like if you introduce Spanglish in the education system, don't you think that, you know, that kind of throw things off a little bit?
I think it would actually stop marginalizing students.
So let me get this straight. You have this idea that we should introduce Spanglish into schools or like Spanish, but then what's stopping people from...
You know what ESL is? English as a second language?
Yeah.
Those programs? ESL programs in California, right, were prohibited under the 474. I think it's 474, the law, right?
Right.
Where ESL classes were taught in English only. Can you explain that to me, how you're teaching a foreigner English classes in only English?
Well, I mean, like I said, people here largely speak English, like widely speak English, and we use it in highways. We use it.
No, I know, but how are you teaching a language in the language that you expect them to learn it?
I'm not quite getting what you're saying.
So let me just put it in this way: you have a Hispanic person from. Let's just say you have a Hispanic person, right? Which means Spanish speaking, that wants to learn English,
Right.
but only has Spanish knowledge, and you start exposing English terms to this person.
Right.
How do you expect them to learn if you're not teaching them in their language?
Well, I mean, I really don't know. I mean,
That's my point.
Yeah.
That Spanglish will actually be more inclusive. ESL, in a dual ESL classroom, meaning both languages are present, then that actually, it's been proven that there's a specific ESL dualism of the ESL classroom setting where it's 90% in Spanish and 10% in English, okay?
Right.
And these kids test higher in math and English, and they're learning a second language, Spanish.
Right.
And they're testing very well in English too. So what is a problem? That's again where the exclusion starts at a very early stage in life. And that's why we have a lot of community members that don't take the routes we did, because they didn't have that extra initiative or that extra intent of saying, why do you think a lot of kids here say school is fucking hard?
Right.
Right? Because they're not exposed to the right systems. They're not taught the language in the first place the way it's supposed to be taught to be an inclusive environment. And that's my issue. That's the systematic issue.
Right.
And that's where I start again, and I go back to that linguistics fellowship that I did this past summer that really exposed me to that reality. And I'm like, that is a fact. That is 110% true. Because how do you expect someone to learn a new language? I mean, if I wanted to learn Mandarin and someone just started speaking Mandarin, shit, I'm out the fucking minutes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
it begins with language. Is that what you're saying? It begins with language.
Yeah. I mean, language is one of the biggest wars that we've had.
That's interesting because I've never heard it. I've never heard it through that perspective. Like I've never heard language being like, an actual thing that reinforces white privilege.
Yeah, I mean, it really does, because if you think about the people that speak it the most.
The reason I'm strongly opposed to white privilege is for the fact that I feel like it creates this victimhood culture, and I feel like that's not beneficial to a lot of people, because I feel that the best kind of encouragement you could get from someone is telling someone that they could do everything they can or set their minds to. I remember listening to Dr. Ochoa in 11th grade class, and she would always bring up the fact that we're minority groups, that we can't do anything, that because there's a system in place that's hindering us from reaching our full capabilities, and that white people are doing better, we're going to be struggling all our lives. But I feel that kind of talk isn't really beneficial. It might be to certain people.
It was to you.
It wasn't. It actually made me feel really terrible about myself the moment I'd walk out of that class, because I'd feel like, damn, I really can't. And I remember I had this pessimistic view of the world after that. And I'd be talking to Damien after school, like, man, Dr. Ochoa is right. Like, we can't do anything. Like, I don't even want to go to college no more. You know, I was already planning the moment I graduated to not go to college, because I felt that what she told me,
you felt in a system, captured, I felt incarcerated.
Like, whereas I feel if you tell like students that you could do anything, that you could do anything that you put your mind to, that kind of feedback is what's actually going to do more benefit than actually bringing about this victimhood culture.
You know, Jason, I 100% agree with the victimhood. That ideal, right, of this victimology. I do agree with you. However, I do want to go back to Dr. Ochoa and her saying those things. Mm-hmm. Her saying those things to you meant something. And that's why you're doing what you're doing today. And that's why you believe the ways you do, right?
I wouldn't agree with that, though.
Well, but wait, backtrack a little bit. If she would have not had said those things to you directly, if she would have not been a part of that, right? Confusion to say. Because when I used to have conversations with her, it wasn't like she would tell me that's the reality or that's not the reality. She would just introduce the whole issue, the social issue. You know, this is the social issue, and you're going to deal with it the way you will, right? I remember her and the way she would present these ideas and almost like philosophies of society, right? That were in place. And to me, it never really fully got to me, because I knew that if I can work hard, I can get anywhere I wanted to. You know? And having the opportunity that in high school, I was already working since, you know, like 9th grade, ever since I stepped into high school, like already being a part of like, you know, working and stuff. And I knew that the power was in my hands. But that there's always going to be the superior one that's going to see you less of yours, you know, that's always going to be seeing you less of, or you're going to be always in the bottom of something, right? But it's our responsibilities as autonomous individuals to know that we have potential, to know that no matter fucking what, we can still go on.
That's exactly the kind of talk that I feel that people need more of.
Yeah, and I mean, look, victimology is a thing, but racism is also a thing. But the other thing that we do have is a privilege that a lot of people around the world, people of color around the world, don't have, which is being American.
But does that necessarily, like, does that attribute to like the color of your skin? Like, just because a person's white doesn't mean they're American.
Oh, no. I'm saying being a person of color, right? A privilege that we have as being a person of color and being American. That's a privilege that we have, because the American citizenship is worth more than anything in the world. Everyone wants that American citizenship. And that's something that I have in my mind every day, because my parents are undocumented and they still have that lack of opportunity. And I know what it is to be living in a household of fear. So I can't be a victim anymore. I know that, you know? And yes, I've been a victim and I still am a victim in many ways. But if I stay a victim in that mindset, then I'm captured. And who knows what my response would be, you know? And I think that a lot of people out there do need to hear that life moves on, time goes on, and people will stop caring about it. And you have to know how to find that voice, how to find that movement of yourself. In my case, dance. That's one of the movements I find, you know. I myself also am not involved as much in a lot of social groups on my campus, because I think that there is this autonomy that I have as an individual that goes beyond the superficial identities that categorize me. I think that there is more to me than just the categories I'm given.
Yeah.
You know, and that's something that I value about myself and something that I've recognized, and now I move on with it. So what I do is like I don't stay stuck in that place. I don't want to stay stuck in that place or in that category, because if I do stay stuck in that category, then I'm not going to go nowhere in life.
Right.
You know, and yes, I agree with you 100% with that. And I feel that everyone in this community needs to hear that it is up to us and the will is up to us. And there's nothing holding us back unless you do have something holding you back.
Thank you for saying that, man. I feel like a lot of people need that encouragement.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I have a very phenomenal scholarship advisor. Mm-hmm. His name is Gregory Cazolas. He's a white male, heterosexual male. And he's giving his money to me for a better education and more opportunity. He recognizes his white privilege.
You think so?
Yes, that's why he's giving his money away.
Well, what do you say to the people that are white and don't necessarily have a lot of money? Where's their white privilege then? Wouldn't you say that it's more about a wealth privilege rather than a race privilege? Because I feel like you've been saying all these things about white people want their money, but like the thing that keeps coming up repeatedly is their money. And wouldn't you say then that it is this wealth that's this wealth privilege rather than race privilege? Because I've met people that are white that are doing fairly bad or that are poor. Yeah. I've worked at warehouses filled with white people as well.
They're struggling, yes.
Yeah.
They're struggling just like...
Where exactly is their white privilege then?
Well, their white privilege to me is that they've fucked it over. Their white privilege.
No, but this is the thing. The problem with white privilege, in my opinion, is that when you say white privilege, who are you talking about exactly? Are you talking about like people that came during the colonial era, or are you talking about the wave of immigrants that came in the 19th century? Because there was a lot of immigrants that came from Italy, that came from like Switzerland during that era or that time. German people came during that time, and they are white, but they don't necessarily... They don't really...
They didn't come with the same Protestant privilege.
Their ancestry doesn't trace back to colonialism. I was talking to one of my good friends, Jackson, from Weird Wave Coffee. He set up his shop here in Boyle Heights not too long ago. He's actually, I believe, an Italian... he's a descendant of an Italian family. And he came after colonialism. Yet people protest him. They vandalize his shop. They spray paint his area, or they throw paint at his area. They break his glass windows simply because of the fact that he's white. And... there's this group called the Defend Boyle Heights Coalition here in Boyle Heights that repeatedly harassed this man, that said, oh, we don't want him here because he's white. And so that's the problem I have with white privilege, that it's creating this antagonism on people just simply based on the color of their skin.
My response to that is one that, unfortunately, it's a system that was created by the white man. And
hold on.
So no, wait. Hear me out, right? That's a system that was created by the white men. And unfortunately, it's fucked up our society in America, specifically in America. It's fucked up the way that we see each other.
Yeah.
But
don't you think that that's something that minorities have created? White privilege, the idea of white privilege, is something that minorities reinforce. And like I said, this idea of white privilege is ultimately what led to this the vandalism that occurred to this man's shop. I mean, I don't think it's fair.
I mean, I don't think that's fair either, right?
And I've met a lot of cool white people, you know? I've met a lot of cool white people, and I've made some good friends that are white, and I just don't think that it's I have
a lot of white friends in my school too.
Exactly.
But they know that they're my friends because they're allies, but also because they acknowledge their white privilege themselves. They know that no matter what, if you put an African American woman, right, versus a white man.
Are you saying African American or do you mean black?
Well,
because there's a lot of people that are black but are not African.
No, I understand. Let's say black and African American.
Okay.
Because You have
Some people prefer African American, some people
no,
prefer
no,
black.
and I'm gonna go with black and African American women, because black being that's what society sees, and African American me being because it might have been a black person that actually immigrated to America and was not brought through the slave trade. So, does that make sense?
Yeah.
African American to me means that that person immigrated to the United States in their own courtesy.
Exactly. That's what it means.
Black is the trace of slavery, of dehumanizing.
I don't like to call African Americans African Americans. I like to just call them Americans because that's what they are. They're Americans. They have every right to be calling themselves Americans without the hyphen or the African in it.
Yeah, well, like, are you talking about people that are descendant from Africa and come to this country?
No, people that were part of slavery. Those deserve to be called just Americans.
Yes, they, and of course they are.
They've earned that right.
Yes, but a lot of them don't just call themselves Americans. They call themselves black,
right,
for a specific reason.
Yeah.
Right, and those specific reasons you and I will never know because we're not black.
Well, I think that people that identify as black rather than African American, well, mostly in my experience, the people that I've met that call themselves or that want to be called black, the reason that they want to call themselves black is because they're not necessarily African. Like they'll trace their ancestry back to Jamaica rather than Africa.
Well, I mean, and also just because they didn't come into their own by courtesy, you know, because a Mexican American means you come from Mexico in courtesy, so you immigrate to the United States, right? The Mexican American, that's the hyphen. African American is the same thing. You, in courtesy of yourself, you immigrate to America.
Okay.
That's African American. But black is different. Black means that it was brought through the slave trade. They were brought through the slave trade, and that's why they see themselves as black, because that's what they were called by the white men. They were called black. They were called less. They were this entity of less, right? And that's where my point is the white men created race. I mean, that's a fact.
Right.
And now there is this white privilege that is seen, so it passes down generations. So I feel that if there's gonna be any type of unity, that the white man has to say, okay, I have privilege and I accept my privilege. What can I do to help you?
Yeah. And Jackson is exactly like that. He said,
and that's my thing, right? That's where I go back to say that the white man created that. So that's why you have minority groups, and if you want to call them radical groups, right, that come and attack the white men, right? Because they believe that there's better opportunity for that place than a white man, right? Like they believe that another minority from this community can open a business and start investing instead of that white man. But that's not how business works. That's not how investments works, and we both know that.
Yeah.
And it's whoever has the opportunity and whoever is working hard enough to actually open the business.
Yeah, let me tell you the story about this guy. So this guy Jackson, he's originally, I think, from Utah, but he moved to British Columbia, like Canada, and then came and set up shop here in Boyle Heights simply because of the fact that it's cheaper here to rent a local business. So he rented a spot. He didn't displace anyone. So the person that owns that area, they were not in business. There was no Mexican people there before. It was simply up for rent, and he took advantage of that. He set up his shop, and shortly after he set up his shop, he got all this negative backlash from people in these coalitions that reinforced the idea of white privilege, that it's this predominantly racist or oppressive thing that's destroying the community. And so they started vandalizing his shop without actually knowing him or even wanting to start a conversation with this guy. The thing about this guy is that he reinforces the idea that he should that people should hire locally, and that's what he's done. He's just a local business owner. He hires people locally. He gave 6 people from the community jobs. And so, I mean, he's only doing good things for the area. If anyone's going to protest, they should protest the big businesses here: Starbucks, McDonald's. Those are the real corporations that are displacing people, that are taking over their shops, buying out their areas, and then setting up shop. As you can see, the Panda Express here on Soto Street, they bought out the area from the local owner, and then they set up their shop. So it's the bigger corporations that are actually doing this, not necessarily one white individual. But this white privilege idea has taken over, man. And it's made people just hate others because of the color of their skin. It's almost like this reverse racism thing, man. What do you say about something like that?
I feel that, you know, being in California and saying white privilege is different than being in Pennsylvania and saying there's white privilege.
But wouldn't you make that case about New York too? Like New York is the neighbor of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And like,
but they have nothing to do with each other.
Right.
They're very separate states. I mean, I have the feeling they're just completely separate. Like, I mean, it's just crazy to say.
Yeah, there's some states that got a long way to go.
Yeah, so I mean, Pennsylvania being one of those states that has a long way to go, white privilege there is a thing. You know, white privilege there really is a thing. And it sucks because I know it's present because there's not people like me in the school that I go to. There's not a lot of representation, right? But I'm telling you, it's about what the white man does in terms of the white in its white privilege to better the communities.
But I'm very confused when you say white privilege. Who are you talking about exactly? Like what group? What ethnicity? Because like I said, there's a lot of ethnicities that are categorized as white. That being Italian, Germans, people from Switzerland. Like who do you mean when you say white?
White Americans.
But like
I mean, because once they come to America, they consider themselves Americans.
Well, actually, that's not true because when this
for the most part,
when this new wave of immigration happened in the 19th century, a lot of immigrants were they were getting into gang fights because Italians didn't like the Irish people, and there was this they got into all these fights because they didn't like the new wave of immigrants that were coming in. So it's like they received their backlash back in the day as well, and now it doesn't matter if your ancestry traces back to Italy or it traces back to Germany. Now, if you're white, you're going to be discriminated against by people that are minorities.
I want us to think about our government system, the way it's set up, right? How else is Donald Trump in office?
Well, I mean,
with his money, of course.
How exactly has the money led to his
presidency?
His election? Yeah.
I mean, he funded his own election.
Exactly.
That speaks for it in itself, right?
I feel it has more to do than just his money, though, because
it definitely does. Because it's also his white privilege. I mean, that's where I go back to the same idea, and I reinforce that his white privilege is what makes him stand in office today. Because if that would be a black man taking that office, or if that would have been, even then, it would have been just a woman, you know, whatever, if it was a woman of color, if it was, or just even then a white woman, you know, and doing the shit that he's been doing and the ways that he talks about other Americans, because Mexicans are Americans,
right?
More Americans than the Europeans that crossed the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay.
To me, that's
Let me get back to Donald Trump. So you're saying that his money bought his way to his election.
Yeah.
I don't entirely agree with you, man. I feel that his election has more to do about the underlying sentiments felt across the nation with all this new wave of liberals standing out and saying radical stuff. And I feel that it was more about how people felt about the nation itself and where it was going that led to his election. So, and also the attention that Donald Trump brought to the stage. It's this new guy that was fucking, you know, crazy. Like he was in this reality TV show, and he was in this and in that. He was a popular guy before he even went into campaigning, right? And people knew him already. They didn't have to know who he was. People knew Donald Trump, you know? So it was much easier to want to elect someone like that.
I think that his publicity was because of his hate.
His hate.
Yeah.
So I could agree with that.
His publicity was created against his tactic of targeting Mexicans as drug dealers and rapists.
Yeah, I feel like that.
And there is a lot of white Americans that believe that.
Yeah.
So
Like I said, the underlying the sentiments people have.
yeah, and I believe that precedence won because it showed the true colors of this country.
Exactly, and that's exactly where I
and
agree with you.
and not only of this country, but of white Americans.
Right. Because you could have $1 billion. That's
So then,
not gonna
but
buy
no,
you.
I know, but then what does that mean then?
What?
If a picket like him is in office and is white, right? What does that mean?
Oh.
Like, what does that mean to the idea of white privilege?
I mean, we had a black president before Donald Trump.
I mean, but my question is, what does that mean in terms of Donald Trump?
I feel like it has less to do with his race and more to do with who this man is. Like, this guy was already popular.
I feel like it still has to do with his race. It still has to do with his race. It has, because a lot of the shit he is saying comes from a place of privilege. To say that, to categorize people. I don't know of any other person that categorizes as much as he does right now.
Well, what about the people that reinforce the idea of white privilege? Isn't that categorizing?
It is categorizing, right? But what do you not expect the minorities to also respond?
The problem I have with identity culture, man, is that we should look at people for who they are.
For humans.
Yeah.
I agree completely.
I feel
But then
like,
why are, I mean, in the rhetoric, why are gays not seen equal as heterosexuals if that's only love that they embrace? I'm just gonna give you that example.
like I said, man,
There's a lot of conversation that happens with with what white privilege has caused to this country, because the white men used that privilege in history, and they used it and they manipulated it, and they've created systems of categories, and unfortunately, it's now backlashing. And and that's going back to saying that race and the idea of racism has actually not only affected, now going back to the people, right, that created this system, but it's also creating this victimology in minorities. So white privilege is an issue. It was an issue, and it still is an issue, right? Because if you think about it, if white privilege would have never happened since the beginning of time, this country this land wouldn't be the way it is.
I'm speaking from a perspective of someone that knows white people and the damage that
I know white people.
and the damage that white privilege has caused to my friends. You know, the idea of white privilege, I've always recognized it as something that it's not necessary, because I feel it does more harm than good. I feel that this idea of white privilege, it reinforces the ideas of wanting to cause violence or wanting to fight against someone just based on the color of their skin. I feel we should get rid of this identity thing. I feel we should look at people for individuals. You know?
But you see, that's the thing, that not everyone thinks like you. And the people that have the privilege, they won't give that up. That's the other issue. That once you're born with that white privilege, right? Again, I'm going back to the idea of being born with this. You're not giving it up. That's the reality, right? The same thing goes with this. You're born into a rich family. Fuck that shit. You're not going to give your money up, right? I mean, you have the Amish.
Why? What do you mean?
The Amish people, they are very close communities, and they keep their money in their family.
Right.
And yes, they are white people, and that they've been, even then, and this is in Pennsylvania, right? For example, they have their own autonomy and they have their own way of life, and they're respected.
You
right?
said they don't want to give up their money.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily what is up to them to decide, because the government will tax you based on your income, regardless of the color of your skin or what race you're part of.
They don't tax them on water, which is the thing that they supply the most of.
People that are in the 1% are taxed at a marginal rate above 50%. Now, you're telling me that they don't like to give away their money, but their total income after, I believe it's somewhere around $100,000, gets taxed over 50%. So they do give up a large portion of their income, like regardless of whether they want to or not.
I mean, again, I'm saying in terms of opportunity that has direct effect to individuals like you and I. And I'm going back to my scholarship advisor.
Right. Because
that's the impact. That's the difference.
There are scholarships and there are grants given to students solely based on the color of their skin, their race, ethnicity, but not if you're white. And don't you think that's almost an unfair advantage that we have, that they don't? People in the middle class, they don't get considered if they're white. Even if they need the money, they need the scholarship or the grant, people in the middle class cannot get those scholarships that we are granted.
Well, at F&M, for example, it's a financial need-based institution. So based on your financial needs and your income, that's what you're given.
Right.
So it doesn't matter what color you are necessarily. The income is what matters the most.
Right.
But going back to my earlier statement is I know, and because I live this gap. Right. I've seen it and I live it, and I mean, I'm in that community every day, and I know that there are certain things that I just can't do. Like I can't party unless I'm white.
and I have the experience of knowing people that because they're white get attacked. So you say to me that you're this person that's also have these experiences that people have been discriminating you in Pennsylvania.
They've kicked me out
but
of
I've also
frat
seen
parties because I'm not white.
I've also seen people get discriminated against because they're white.
And that discrimination is, again, it goes on, right? But we can't forget who created it. We can't forget who created that. And it is the responsibility of the creator to let go of it. And then you can start seeing action. I think that's where the movement comes from the creator.
A social movement?
Yeah. I think a social movement in terms of this white privilege, in order for it to end, right, needs to come from the people that created this and that still live up to it, right?
I think people just got to be nicer, man. We got to be nicer, man.
Yeah, I mean, we do have to be nicer, but in order for people to understand first, because, you know, like, I solely believe that it's I see people for who they are, right? Not for what I don't care about, you know, like, I mean, if you want to give me your pronouns, by all means, and I respect that, and I will call you by your pronouns.
I'm the exact same way.
Right? But I'm not going to, I'm not about the categories. I don't care about that. You know, like, we're having an interaction because we are two individuals, right? But in order for that to happen, right, we have to look at the macro issues. The macro issues entail that there is an issue that's foreseen because of this white privilege. So then let's acknowledge it. There is white privilege. So now let's say that the white people, you know, the white privileged individuals, they be like, okay, we recognize we have the white privilege. And if we've created this in history and we are sorry and we want to move on. And we want to see how we can all help each other as a human race. But that's not going to happen. So when you have minorities, if you're telling minorities to be, yo, this shit is going on, but it's fine. When you have minorities like...
Yeah, I think that camera might die anytime soon, so we got to start wrapping this up.
Yeah,
soon.
so when you have minorities and you ask them to just not see white privilege, then it becomes, you know, it's like you're telling them that the way that they're born into is because that it has no explanation. They're like, wait, what? Like, so Boyle Heights is just, I was born into Boyle Heights and I was born in a working class and in a minority community.
I think history would fill that void.
You know, and again, it's a big part of...
But I don't think white privilege being taught in school is effective at all. I think that history is. I think that teaching people history and what happened in our past is. But every part of it.
Yes, exactly. Every single part. But history in every part of it. Not only in what the winning side decides to write.
Yes. And that's why people like you are important. And I'm very grateful to have you on, man. I'm very grateful that you came. And thank you for coming, man. I really appreciate all the information that you provided to this podcast. And I hope I could see you here again soon, man. There's a lot more to talk about.
There's a lot to unfold.
Yeah. So like I said, thank you guys for sticking around.
Thank you.
Thank you guys all for sticking around.
I talk a lot.
Watching this podcast, man, it was a blast seeing you here again, Chente, man.
Likewise.
If you guys liked the video, make sure you guys subscribe, hit the like button, share with your friends. If you guys found this particular conversation interesting, make sure you guys share it. Just keep following with the content that I'm posting, and see you guys next time. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Jason.